This, in the industry, is known as an undesirable aircraft state. My name is Juan Brown. You're watching the BLANCOLIRIO channel. Let's get into it. Today we're going to discuss 3 recent accidents that involved operations in short runways that emphasize the importance of stabilized approaches and knowing your aircraft. This video is brought to you by viewers like you that support this channel here on Patreon because the YouTube algorithm does not favor these sort of technically accurate videos. This accident occurred back on the 30th of July at about 5:30 local time when this Cessna 182 impacted this house. The temperature at the time of the accident was 38 degrees Celsius, nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And looking at the position of the flaps, it seems to me that this accident occurred after a go-around, a botched go-around or a botched landing. The accident report on the Aviation Safety Network says this accident occurred shortly after takeoff, but there's no ADS-B data to support this accident. And if anybody is familiar with this accident there on the streets, you can leave a comment below in the comment section as to exactly what condition, what this aircraft was doing at the time that it impacted this house located right off of the end of the runway, the short runway there at Kashmir, Washington. Fortunately, the 2 folks on board this aircraft survived, but they were stuck inside this airplane as their doors were trapped shut by the structure of the aircraft. Looks like firefighters maybe had to go through the rear window back here in order to extricate the 2 people on board the aircraft. And fuel was leaking out of these wing tanks at the time of the extrication, but there was no post-crash fire. Here's the location of the Kashmir Dryden Airport on the banks of the Wenatchee River. It's a short, about 1,600 feet or so. Yep, 1,654 feet of runway, and the house that this aircraft impacted is this house located right here next to the ball field. Let me scoot this over a little more so you can see it. This house located right here at the end of the ball field, right in line with the runway. And looking at the report on the Aviation Safety Network, we see the winds were 260 at 7 knots, which would have added a 7-knot tailwind component in the effort to land on runway 07 or end up going around on runway 07. Up next in the short field landing contest is the Cessna Caravan at Merrill Field in Alaska a few days ago, captured here on dashcam by BLANCOLIRIO viewer and fan Eric Massey as he was apparently commuting to work alongside the airfield
despite the fact that they were
when he witnessed this.
Call 911.
It's a penalty from the department.
Oh my God!
Going right through the intersection
For $20,000.
without hitting anybody or any cars. A large Cessna
Call
Caravan.
911.
Now, this accident occurred back on Friday, the 1st of August at 2:54 local time with 8 folks on board. It's November 645 Alpha Tango, operated by Alaska Air Transit, Cessna 208B Grand Caravan, coming into Merrill Field. The Cessna 208 overran runway 34. We'll go take a look at the dimensions of 34, relatively short runway, at Merrill Field, going through a fence and crossing East 5th Avenue. That's the road that Eric was driving on when he captured that dashcam video. Before coming to a stop in a field, there were no injuries. Runway 34 is 2,640 feet long, and East 5th runs 200 meters north of the end of the runway. Winds were 310 at just 6 knots, and otherwise good weather. Here's a look at the Merrill Field from Google Maps. Runway 34 located right here, the shorter runway of the 2, measuring in at just over 24, let's run that out here, 2,800 feet or so. So it looks like landing on runway 34, then he bounced across the approach end of runway 7, across a taxiway, across some more green space, then across 5th Avenue, and into this, fortunately, left green space here. Thank you, city planners, for leaving that there and not developing on it. Overshooting the runway by nearly 1,000 feet off the end of the runway. Now, this accident does have some preliminary ADS-B data from FlightAware, and if we just look at the last 3 or 4 data points, from 1,200 feet on in, Got the airspeed at 123 knots and down to 109 knots, but look at this rate of descent. Going from a stabilized 600 to 700 feet per minute to 1,200 feet per minute, 1,300 feet per minute to 1,400 feet per minute. I can make it until you can't. This last accident, dealing with a unstabilized approach to a short runway, unfortunately involves a fatality. It occurred on Wednesday, the 30th of July, a PA 28181 Archer owned by Condair Flyers. I believe that was a flying club. November 961 Delta Alpha. There was one fatality, 3 folks on board this aircraft. ADS-B data indicates the aircraft conducted 2 missed approaches while trying to land on runway 10 at Block Island. It crashed during its 3rd attempt to land east of the airport, so it overshot the runway and crashed either on the go-around or after overshooting the runway severely in the vicinity of Connecticut Avenue. The airplane came to a rest inverted, and there was no post-crash fire. The runway there at Block Island is 2,502 feet long. The pilot was attempting to land on runway 10, and the METAR at the time shows winds variable at 3, then winds out of the west at 7, then winds out of the south at 9. Block Island Airport is located here on this island off the coast of Rhode Island and is a short runway, 2,600 feet long. The crash occurred in these woods right over here off the end of runway 10, just short of Connecticut Avenue. Here we have some ADS-B data from ADS-B Exchange, keeping in mind that the Piper Archer has approach speeds typically on the order of 70 to 75 knots indicated airspeed, and you can get over the fence as low as 64 knots indicated airspeed. Looking at this ADS-B data, we see a second approach. These are go-rounds. The second approach, much tighter approach at much slower ground speeds, and then the pilot goes out for a much longer approach to get more stabilized on his approach. He's getting his ground speeds. Well, his ground speed starts picking up here from, 75 knots to 91 knots here. He's holding steady at 700 feet, 91 knots of ground speed at 600 feet, still 91 knots at 500 feet, and 102 knots at 400 feet, and a descent rate, according to ADS-B Exchange here, right down in here, of 1,400 feet per minute. Remember, you want to be below 1,000 feet per minute rate of descent to maintain a stabilized approach, even especially in these smaller airplanes. 1,700 foot per minute rate of descent at 102 knots. 102 knots, 2,200 foot per minute rate of descent, 200 feet, 103 knots at a 2,000 foot per minute rate of descent. So he's just bonsaiing for the end of the runway, hell-bent and determined to try and stuff it on there. And he ends up crashing over here in the woods well off the end of the runway. These 3 accidents emphasize the importance of stabilized approaches, knowing your aircraft, and knowing how to land consistently on the numbers. I see so much bad instruction out there these days of students and instructors sailing past the 1,000-foot markers, instructors allowing their students to land halfway down the runway without going around. Whenever I'm showing young folks how to fly these aircraft, they are required to land on or near the numbers every time, and we practices in the evenings when it's calm, and then we'll go out and have spot landing contests where we challenge each other to see how close you can land on or beyond the spot. Here's young Shaden, maybe your second time in the Husky, and probably only second or third time in a tail dragger. She's a young CFI. Getting her to land on the numbers consistently. Here's a young 17-year-old young man learning in the J3 Cub. He has recently soloed in a 172, but we're getting him trained up here in the J3 Cub doing power off approaches and landings, consistently getting it on the numbers every time. And this is perhaps his second or third flight in the J3 Cub. You got to hold your students to a higher standard. Float up a little bit, and then beautiful three-point landing just beyond the numbers. That's what you need to train to. That's the standard we need to see more of in the industry. Get out there and practice. Get your spot landings down. I cannot take you into the backcountry if you cannot consistently land on the numbers. Because if I'm going to take you out into the backcountry into conditions like this, you better be able to land on the numbers and on speed and have a stabilized approach, because at one point here on this approach, there is no go-round option. This is Cabin Creek back in June in the Husky.
Last bit of trim for the player.
We're
Clear
well
these bushes
beyond
on
the
the end.
point of going around.
Speed checks.
The spot that I'm aiming for is way up here. See that mountain there? We're long past the point of going around. This is a grass strip, probably maybe 1,600 feet long, but it's uphill, so there's
Well, these boys here.
more than plenty of room.
You think there's nobody out here? They're waiting for a 206 pickup as well, I bet.
So get out there and practice and make every approach and landing a precision approach and landing. So we could put an end to these senseless accidents due to a lack of proficiency in stabilized approaches and landing on the numbers. Thank you so much for your support, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.